This is Larry Will of Mount Airy, Maryland, and you're listening to the International Radio Report on CKUT 90.3 FM Montreal.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the International Radio Report on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal for Sunday, May the 7th, 2023. We thank you for tuning in. My name's Sheldon. Gilles is with me, as usual, and we have 30 minutes of news and information from the world of radio. If you'd like to reach us, our email address, radioreport@yahoo.com. We are live streaming and archived at ckut.ca. Our Facebook group is International Radio Report, 911 members. We invite you to join the group there as well. And our YouTube channel has the most current show stored there and previous shows that you can go and listen to at your leisure. Look for International Radio Report channel on YouTube, and you can subscribe. We have 823 subscribers there at the present time. So that's who we are. We thank you for tuning in, and we'll get right down to business. We have some interesting stories again for you this week, and Gilles, you'll get us going.
Yep, in our first news item for this week, the Community Radio Fund celebrates the passage of C11 via the Community Radio Fund of Canada. So the Community Radio Fund of Canada, CRFC, is celebrating the passage of Bill C11, the Online Streaming Act. After 30 years, it is time the Broadcasting Act is amended to reflect today's reality. The changes to this law will serve all Canadians. This is an important step forward for all community radio stations, said CRFC Executive Director Alex Friedman. No longer are these stations only recognized as the third pillar of Canadian broadcasting. These amendments acknowledge the key roles these radio stations play in connecting their local community and promoting the Canadian voice. The amendments to the Act now commit support for community broadcasting that reflects both the diversity of the communities being served, including with respect to the languages in use within those communities, and to their ethno-cultural and indigenous composition, and the high engagement and involvement in community broadcasting by members of those communities, including with respect to matters of public concern. They acknowledge that community radio provides a voice to tastes and interests not adequately provided for by the programming provided for mass audiences, and include programs devoted to culture, politics, history, health and public safety, local news and current events, local economy and the arts. The community radio stations reflect Canada's communities, regions, indigenous and multicultural nature, including through third language programming. And importantly, the new act recognizes the role of community radio stations in fighting disinformation by acknowledging that although community participation, community radio stations strengthen the democratic process and support local news. Until now, the burden of providing support for those who produce Canadian contents, such as community radio, have been borne only by commercial broadcasters. With the passage of C11, online giants who also profit from Canadian audiences will now also have to contribute to the development of Canadian broadcasters, musicians, and artists. The CRFC looks forward to working with the Department of Canadian Heritage to develop the policy direction and to working closely with the Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission to ensure the funds coming from the internet giants are directed to the broadcasters who align with the priorities as set out in C11, the Online Streaming Act. This is a critical step in ensuring Canadians have access to our voices and our culture from every corner of this country. Yes, this is interesting because, of course, as we see that technologies are changing, streaming is now something that is getting more and more important. There's online giants that weren't there a long time ago, like Netflix and company, YouTube, all of that. It is time at some point to, of course, update laws and regulations regarding those. It is nice to see that, yes, there is protection of the Canadian content, but you know, as I was telling you, Sheldon, it also affects people like me because we are going to be checked out with all the information. I've been making sure that, I tag all of my content as Canadian to make sure that it actually goes in the right direction. If they add more rules to what can be done, how it can be done. But I think it is a good thing overall because, yes, there's a lot of content that's been showing up and, sometimes taking over even our local TV or the radio.
The Community Radio Fund is a really interesting organization as well. They gather funds from the big broadcasters, the commercial broadcasters, and they distribute grants every year to campus, community, Indigenous radio stations, ethnic stations that apply. I know our own station, CKUT, has received funding from them for many, many years now. It's money that they just, they couldn't get elsewhere. And it's really the big commercial companies that own lots of media outlets who have to contribute money to this fund every year. So that money is put to good use, and this kind of ties into that. So it's good to see that this Community Radio Fund of Canada is behind all of this, and that will ensure that money is coming from the big broadcasters and going to those smaller specialized broadcasters that are out there as well.
Yeah, it's definitely important because, they don't have the same amount of money as those big broadcasters. So sharing a little bit of the funding is a pretty good idea.
We have yet another story about the possibility of the demise of AM radio. This is sort of it's almost like a soap opera, and we have a new episode every week with stories coming out. But it's good to see that there is this much reaction, and things are happening out there, and maybe some people are going to have some second thoughts about what they were hoping to do. This story comes from Radio Inc., and the headline is 100,000 plus have emailed in support of AM. National Association of Broadcasters launched their second wave of the Depend on AM PSAs, some of which we aired for you on another show. They are aimed at making sure automakers keep AM radios in cars. Along with the news spots, the NAB reports hundreds of thousands of AM listeners have reached out to their representatives. The NAB reports that over 119,000 emails have been sent to lawmakers, emphasizing the continued importance of AM radio in various communities. The NAB highlights that more than 80 million Americans rely on AM radio, and its removal from cars poses a significant public safety risk. This news comes days after the National Alliance of State Broadcasters Association released data showing 1 in 3 AM stations have no FM translator, and only half are available through online streaming. The NAB is managing the support efforts by having listeners text AM to 52886 to get in contact with Congress, alongside the PSAs, scripts, and dedicated page for AM radio, which we'll put a link up for you through wearebroadcasters.com. People are really mobilizing. They're getting public reaction. They're doing more surveys, more statistics, more information gathering as to the role that AM radio does play out there in the public. So hopefully somebody's going to be listening to all this feedback and sitting down and discussing the plans that they've had to basically try to eliminate AM radio.
There's a couple of comments on the last week's show where we talked about it, and one of them from one of our viewers on the YouTube channel said, clearly, if we didn't have AM radio when we were hit by the hurricanes in Florida, I don't even know where we would get the news, because it's the only thing that, goes far enough that we can listen to it even if you're not close to a station.
During that last big hurricane in Florida, the WFLA, the news talk radio station on AM, was one of the few radio stations still on the air. And people were finding them that, had sort of got away from AM radio, but suddenly they realized, hey, what's this voice out there? And it's giving us all this great information. So, there's plenty to back up the importance of AM radio.
Yep.
And I don't know how much backup there is to support the people that want to get rid of it, other than Oh, we can save a lot of money here by,
Yeah.
in our cars in particular, by not filtering out the interference that'll get into the AM radios. So very encouraging. We'll keep reporting on this story as more stories come to us.
Yep.
But this was a very encouraging one.
In our next news item, I hope that it makes the BBC rethink a little bit more about its digital future, because this shows the importance of radio. It's the BBC World Service that launches emergency pop-up radio service for Sudan. So this is via the BBC News by Paul Glynn. An emergency radio service for Sudan was launched on BBC News Arabic on Tuesday by the World Service. The pop-up radio service is broadcast twice daily for 3 months, providing news and information for people in the war-torn African nation. It includes eyewitness accounts and news on diplomatic efforts, the BBC said, and helps to counter disinformation. BBC Director General Tim Davie said the move was crucial at a time of great uncertainty. The program is broadcast live from London, with input and analysis from teams in Amman in Jordan and the Egyptian capital Cairo. It is available on shortwave radio in Sudan as well as online, where listeners are able to hear information on how to access essential supplies and services, the BBC said. The World Service provides an essential lifeline to many around the world where access to accurate news and information is scarce. The enhanced emergency service for Sudan will be crucial at a time of great uncertainty in the country. Fighting that has erupted in the Sudanese capital, Khartoum, and elsewhere in the country is a direct result of a vicious power struggle within the country's military leadership. The clashes are between the irregular army and a paramilitary force called the Rapid Support Forces. Lillian Landor, director of the World Service, said the situation in Sudan has escalated quickly, with its citizens seeking clear, independent information and advice at a time of crucial need. BBC's Arabic emergency radio service for Sudan will bring vital live updates on the situation on the ground and inform listeners of life-saving resources. So the program is broadcast at 7 hours GMT or 07 UTC on 21510 kilohertz and at 15 hours UTC on 15310 kilohertz. The HFCC has indicated that both transmissions are from the Dabaya transmitter site using 250 kilowatts. So this is coming out of the United Arab Emirates.
Yeah, and a lot of people have been checking to see what it sounds like, and it is being heard fairly well with 250 kilowatts covering probably a good part of the Middle East, North Africa, and of course the target area, Sudan. Those times are convenient for the people there, maybe not so convenient for us here if we want to try to pick them up, but I'm sure a very welcomed voice coming in on people's radios.
So what's happening with our sun? Well, the sun is pretty active this week. Lots of sunspot groups, and one very peculiar sunspot. It has the reversed polarity of all the other ones. And they were saying actually this week that about 3% of all sunspots during a solar cycle are reversed polarity, and that usually the reversed polarity spots are the ones that erupt most. So, and it's been showing this week, actually, because there's been a lot of eruptions coming out of that sunspot. So that sunspot is AR 3296, and it has a possible threat for a lot of other solar flares, M-class, and maybe even X-class solar flares in the coming days. There is a possibility that sometime today or tomorrow, we might get into a minor to moderate geomagnetic storm because of a series of coronal mass ejections that happened between May 4th and 5th. It's kind of difficult to disentangle and properly model the eruptions. Nevertheless, the growing number of Earth-side eruptions is boosting the odds of a CME strike in the next days. So solar activity is going to be interesting to look at. Sunspot number 139, solar flux 162. And with all that activity going on, well, the best way to see how conditions are on the bands, well, it's to turn on a radio and listen.
This is Gregory Majewski of Oakdale, Connecticut. You're listening to International Radio Report on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal.
With every program, we have the solar report for you. And if you want to learn a little bit more about that, we'd suggest you go take a look at spaceweather.com. It's where a lot of our information comes from. And there's a lot more there explaining what all this stuff is about. If you're not really into this sort of thing, you might want to learn a little bit more about it. So check out spaceweather.com, and lots of great photos there of things going on the sun, aurora borealis photos, all kinds of really neat stuff relating to space. So you can check that out. We return to Africa for our next story. This comes from Raphael Obanyo for Radio World magazine. How radio is promoting peace in Africa. Radio serves as an important tool for public education and information. More importantly, at the global level, radio remains the most widely consumed media. In Africa, radio continues to be one of the best media platforms to reach the most people, especially in rural areas. This year, the world celebrated World Radio Day under the theme Radio and Peace, highlighting the important role the medium plays in promoting peace and averting conflict, encouraging understanding, reconciliation, and reconstruction. As one of the most accessible types of media worldwide, radio is also key for promoting diversity, dialogue, and solidarity. In Madagascar, Studio Sifaka radio program, supported by the United Nations Peace Building Fund and implemented by Fondation Hirondelle, targets young Malagasy, enabling them to engage in dialogue peacefully. In particular, Studio Sifaka facilitates the contribution of young people to the development and peace-building efforts in the country. Since December 2019, the station has been producing a 2-hour daily radio program broadcast by a network of 24 local radio partners that covers about 50% of the total population of Madagascar. The content is produced by young Malagasy journalists. Similarly, Radio Womina in Kenya encourages listeners to embrace a peaceful coexistence in the community and society as a whole. In one of its programs titled Amani, Imani, Peace and Faith, the station highlights the interdependence between peace and faith. Where there is peace, there is faith, and where there is faith, there will be peace. The Amani, Imani program discusses aspects of human life that enhance peace individually, as well as in the family, community, and nation. In 2022, a consortium consisting of Free Press Unlimited, Acted, Oxfam, Concern, Co-op, and Impact under the Relsud project rebuilt and brought back on the air 6 radio stations, which continue to fulfill their role as peace builders and stimulators of dialogue in local communities in the Central African Republic. The radio stations have been vital in conflict prevention, rehabilitation, reconciliation, and stabilization, especially in the southeastern part of the country, which is the most unstable and conflict-prone region. Radio Baressa, ESCA, and Zareda are some of the 6 radio stations that were rehabilitated under the project. In Senegal, Radio Kasumé, an all-women's radio station, is promoting peace, dialogue, and unity in the country's Casamance region. Since it was established, the broadcast has become an essential platform for the promotion of peace in the country. The radio station is part of a group of 18 stations run entirely by women in Senegal's southern region, all of which have played a key role in breaking the communications barrier between opposing sides in the Casamance conflict. These are just some of the examples of how radio in Africa continues to foster peace and avert conflict in different countries on the continent. These and many more radio stations in Africa need to be strengthened for sustainable peace to be realized. As Taufik Jelassi, Assistant Director General for Communications and Information Sector at UNESCO, remarked on the occasion of World Radio Day 2023, radio is an integral part of peace and stability, a pillar for conflict prevention and peace building.
This is good news, and it's interesting to see that, in Africa, lots of areas are very delicate situations, like many other parts in the world, and radio has a role to play to promote peace and help everybody understand each other. I think one of the best ways to have peace is to have people talking to each other. And radio is great for that. And it's something that a lot of people listen to. So cool. This is nice to see that there's all of these efforts of peace using radio.
I know if you go on online sites like Radio Garden, which we talk about, where you can go and click on different parts of the world and listen to local radio, we often hear a lot of the FM stations, which are doing nothing more than, playing music and what have you. Some of these stations are small, they're independent, they may not make it onto these streaming services and what have you, but people in those countries, in remote areas, in particular areas of conflict, can use a very basic, simple radio and tune in to these people who are speaking with them and speaking to them about things going on and how to try to make things better. So here we go. That age-old dinosaur of radio seems to be playing some kind of important role, as much as a bunch of people out there seem to just think it isn't relevant anymore.
So in our next item, we talk about the Artemis 2 astronauts flying to the moon could phone home with ham radio. This is by Elizabeth Owell of Space.com. It's been 40 years since the first astronaut called an amateur radio operator on Earth. Now the moon is in the community's sight. Most of the astronauts aboard the Artemis 2 mission, which will send a quartet of people around the moon in late 2024, are certified AM radio operators. There's high hopes in the community that the astronauts may call home from deep space. The president of Radio Amateurs of Canada told Space.com. We feel it's important that anyone, especially kids, as they determine what they want to do with their life, have an opportunity to talk with astronauts, Phil A. McBride in a recent interview. After 4 decades of communication with low Earth orbit, he added the hope is ham radio will reach further out with the moon. The first ham radio operator in space was NASA astronaut Owen Garriott, W5LFL, who on December 1st, 1983, called Lance Callister, WA1JXN, in Frenchtown, Montana. A ham radio was even aboard the Russian space station Mir, according to NASA, during the Shuttle Mir program that saw NASA astronauts visit the orbiting complex. Today's ham operators communicate with astronauts through amateur radio on the International Space Station, largely aiming to let students directly talk with space flyers, according to the documentation from the group. As of 2022, NASA reports that more than 100 crew members have connected with 250,000 participants on the ground via the ARIS program. The new community is starting to think past the apparent conclusion of the ISS program in 2030 to a time when commercial space stations are expected to begin. McBride said conversations are ongoing about bringing hams onto the commercial venues, although the planning for the outposts are still in the early stages. The current ARIS collaboration involves all the major partners, NASA, European Space Agency, Roscosmos, and the Canadian Space Agency. Artemis will have a similarly international approach for its crews, so presumably, if ham radio is brought on board those missions, several countries will be involved. The astronauts themselves have said how much ham radio means to them. I get choked up every time I read a report about ham radio contact, NASA astronaut Sunita Williams said in 2015. You go through the questions and it sounds like only 10 kids. Then you read a report about how many people were at the event and how much preparation and time the kids took. It is nice to know it makes such a huge impact. I particularly like all of that ham radio and space stuff. I'm a big fan of what's happening out there in the universe also. And it's nice to see, I remember a question that popped up maybe a couple of years ago on the live show where someone said, when will we have our first amateur radio repeater on the moon? Well, maybe not that far off when we start looking at Artemis 2 and the future of space exploration. And I believe every astronaut from NASA needs to be a licensed ham. I think it's a requirement to get up in space. So future looking good for space contacts with amateur radio.
Yeah, some amateurs are already doing these experiments of bouncing signals off the moon.
Yep.
So it would be kind of neat if there was some sort of repeater system stuck up there that they could contact through. Of course, with that elevation, wow, you could really do some amazing things.
Yep.
So encouraging to see that ham radio is going to play a big part in these future missions.
So we have upcoming ham radio contests.
Yeah, speaking of ham radio, as we do every week, we get you up to date on what's going to be happening on the bands. Coming up this coming weekend, we have the CQM International DX Contest. This is organized by a group of Russian amateur radio clubs. It runs from 1200 UTC May 13th to 1159 UTC May 14th. It covers all the standard bands 1.8, 3.5, 7, 14, 21, and 28. It's both a CW and SSB event, and we'll put up the links for this and all the other contests for you to check out all the rules involved.
That reminds me of, I'm amazed at the amount of Russian groups that have the expeditions everywhere around the world on the ham bands. So there's the 56th annual Alessandro Volta WW Worldwide RTTY contest. 1200 Zulu May 13th to 1200 Zulu May 14th, sponsored by the SSB and RTTY Club of Como and the ARI, the Associazione Radioamatori Italiani. This contest is organized to increase interest in RTTY mode as used by radio amateurs and to honor the Italian discoverer of electricity, Alessandro Volta. The bands 3.5, 7, 14, 21, and 28 megahertz, and it's radio teletype RTTY.
All right, so there you have it. Some interesting stories today. If you come across anything interesting you'd like to share with us, you can either post it on our Facebook group or you can email it to us at radioreport@yahoo.com. We'll either use it on the show, or if we don't get to it on the show, it'll get posted up on the Facebook group, or you can post it there yourself, as I said. And do go check out our YouTube channel. We have a lot more shows up there now for you to check out. Yeah. We also have the Internet Archives, where a lot of our shows are available, going way back. I don't know. What's the oldest one on there? It's brought back in
2002, I believe, is the
something like that.
One. Yeah.
The show's been around since 1987, so we don't have all of those there yet, but we are going to be working on trying to get some of those really older shows up there as well. So lots of ways to go back and check out some of our shows. And of course, if you don't listen to the show live, you can always go and check the YouTube channel to get the latest edition as well.
As I've been listening to some of the older shows because I was making the YouTube videos for them, I have to say you have to go back and listen to those. They're very different from what we hear today, and it's very interesting to hear a younger Sheldon also.
Yeah, the shows have gone through a lot of changes over the years. Different hosts at times, and different co-hosts, and different focus at times. I mean, early years we did a lot of local content because we had a lot of local listeners. We didn't have the easy accessibility of people from around the world. So that changed as we moved along. So has the show. It's evolved along the way. And so you can go back and check out some of those early ones and laugh at my voice in particular on the early ones. It doesn't sound like it does now, that's for sure. Anyways, we're all getting older. Thanks for tuning in today. We'll talk to you again next Sunday with our next edition of our show, the International Radio Report, on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal. Have a great week, everybody.
Bye-bye.